I may have to push the, oh, there it goes. Well, you're supposed to have a remote control, right?
Did I miss the drawing?
Okay.
No, that's not Lionel's drawing.
That's not Lionel's drawing?
No, that's not my drawing. I've gone away from that. I'm fully technological, digital.
Fully addicted.
Okay, can you see that okay? I love this digital. This is so wonderful. Okay, so let me bring up the Digitmeister. Here's a show that I couldn't show you last time. Let's see. All right, watch this. This is magic. Should come right up.
Don't jinx it. As soon as you say it should.
Can I connect? I hope we got the right computer. Why did it do that? Wait, that's not my computer, I don't think. Yeah, let's go to this. Hi. Let's see. Oh. It's another computer. I could use multiple computers. It's connected in. Ah, there we go. Okay. This may not help. This might help. So, how to visualize something that is 4D in 3D. And this isn't even 3D, this is 2D. So I'll try to give you some examples, but just bear with me, okay? This is, we're trying to see what does a four-dimensional God look like in 3 dimensions. And so I said I've got these are 3 physical dimensions, right? Not like space, not like time dimension, but it's the same idea. Now that'll make your brain explode, right? So let's see. Go to the next one. Uh-oh, why won't it go to the next one? I had this problem last time. I just opened it too. Let's see, will it go to a slideshow? Ah, maybe it'll do this.
Enter, arrow down.
Yeah, it won't obey me.
Oh, very cool.
Well, this is this one. Let's see, maybe I can force it to, for some reason my PowerPoint, I probably have clogged it up with too much. There we go. Okay, so this is, a tesseract is what we call a 4-dimensional structure in 3 dimensions. It's called a tesseract. And this is one view of a tesseract. So how do you interpret this? Look, it's really strange. Here's another interpretation, which I thought was really interesting, of a 4-dimensional cube in 3 dimensions. And what makes it really interesting is, what does it look like? A cross. It's like, whoa, okay. Look, this is totally science stuff. This is not from any Christian websites. Here's another one. Again, this is 0 dimension, so, a point. 1 dimension, so 2 points makes a line. Or 2 dimensions, so that's a plane, right? 3 dimensions, now this is showing 3 dimensions in 2 dimensions. You can figure that out pretty good. But this is 4 dimensions, so it's a projection of a cube within time, but it's a physical. Your brains aren't exploding yet, that's probably a good thing. Here is a projection of a 3D to 2D. Right? So that's 3D to 2D. Of course, in 2D, that's all you can do. Maybe we need something like they did in Star Wars, right? A 3-dimensional thing and we can
Call it
project it. This is a tesseract. This is a 4-dimensional cube projected into 3 dimensions. Now the problem is that you have to be able, it's like this, you have to be able to see it at every point in every time. It's like a torus, the thing that eats itself. I should have brought a picture of that too. And here's that's the same as the one before. Here's another little example and a tesseract. It's called a tesseract. And this may give you a better idea. See, you're seeing the cube transmuting in time, and at the same time you're seeing multiple cubes.
So it's a cube moving through time.
It theoretically is a cube moving through time. physically it's not, though. Physically it means it's a projection of the cube in...
Your perspective is going to be seeing it differently.
Yeah, your perspective, right? The tesseract is the closest. You're seeing a cube in a cube.
That's really, like you're saying, it's trying to promote, it's trying to show an idea as best we can with the drawing.
This is really hard to grasp, okay? If this were easy to grasp, and I was even thinking today, you know how he said the Nicene Creed, you know why we got to begotten and not made? It's true, right? But that's the best the Latin can do. And it's really interesting that the Greek doesn't do that at all. The Greek takes a total philosophical kind of point, and we'll see even more of that, where the Latin had, remember, what did the Romans took the great ideas of the Greeks and actually built stuff, right? So they're the guys trying to see tesseracts, where the Greeks, what did the Greeks do?
I talked them to death.
Yeah, they talked about it to death. I mean, you really love this, right? So to the Greeks, begotten, the idea of God, of Christ being when God created, right, is just a philosophical idea. But to the Romans, to the Latin speakers who wrote the Nicene Creed and the Apostolic Creed that translate for us, what did they do? They had to put it into words to make it as concrete as they could, but it's euphemistic, right? Because begotten even means procreated. And that's the words we'll see used by John, procreated. But yet we know he wasn't procreated, he became with the creation, which is a beautiful philosophical idea. So anyway, and I think I have two more pictures here. I just tried to get pictures. Here's dimensional expansion. Okay, 0 add x. There's a plane, add y. Here's a cube, add w, which is time. And now I have infinite cubes. I think that's it.
Yeah, what is the dimension that we're missing?
Time.
Well, see, they call it w, but it's really t. It's really time. Yeah, and so this is why it's really difficult to totally comprehend, because when we talk about dimensions, we talk about width and length and height, right? We don't think of time as a dimension, but time is a dimension. However, when we're physically looking at it, we're looking at it not in terms of time, but rather in terms of a w, another dimensional physical dimension. If you want to really get into this, read St. Augustine's On Time. He's the first guy, and he projects, he's the guy who theologicalizes about God as eternal and timeless. And he's the first guy to put it into paper. And Augustine's a great writer anyway, probably the greatest early Christian writer we have on philosophy and theology. So he's the guy. Now, I know it's hard to get through some of that, slog through some of that stuff, but still, it's really worth a read. Augustine. Okay, so I thought I'd show you some fun pictures, and it's this is just interesting stuff.
Could you bring a hologram next week?
Yeah.
Just saying.
You know, I used to get Edmund Scientific when I was a kid, the Edmund Scientific catalog. Anybody else get that? I loved Edmund Scientific. I never could afford anything in there. It was always way over my budget, you know. I think Tammy eventually bought our kid's microscope that we used from Edmund Scientific. So we got a really, no kidding, you know, one. But that was way above my budget when I was young as a lieutenant. But the Edmund Scientific for years had holograms that you could make with lasers. Lasers can be used to make hologram structures, just like Star Wars. No kidding. However, you can't. You have to use simple stuff. But anyway, yeah, maybe I should, right? Holograms. Now we were at this, and I gave you this stuff. We're basically at 3, and this is the pictures from C.S. Lewis, right? John equates Christ with God. In the translation, he was himself in the beginning God. And by the way, he has not mentioned anything about the word Christ or Jesus or anything like that. He's talking about the logical argument. And Tammy said I need to explain, or at least be clear. I don't think I'm going to change the verbiage I use But a Lego as a logical argument doesn't mean that we are arguing, that we're fighting about something, that we're even in a discussion necessarily. What Lego means and what it means to have a logical argument is that you have, like the Greeks, A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. That is a logical argument. It's a reasoned theorem. So you can use all kinds of words to describe this in English, but we would probably say a reasoned theorem or a reasoned discussion or reasoned ideas. It means the speaker has thought about what they're saying. They've thought about it, which is a really, okay, you say, why is this important? Well, your kids, right? I think the thing we always told our son was TMTL, think more, talk less, right? You have to train children to think more, talk less. And we all need to train ourselves to be that way, right? So we as a society, we try to think before we speak, and that's what we tell people to do. In the ancient world, this was a new idea. But the Greeks would say that, if you can look at their words for speaking in multiple ways. So, for example, when they say, I'm going to rimmy you, I'm going to tell you a story, right? Is that before or after? So you start speaking and you tell me a story, I say, well, you rimmied me, right? No. They would say that if you write it, especially, you're saying to the reader, the writer is going to tell me a story. They're rimmying, right? If I fimmy you, it means I'm giving you my opinion. If I am giving you a Lego, I've thought about it. It's a logical argument. It's a reasoned discussion. So I know it's maybe a little foreign to us in thinking that way, but just put in whatever magic words you want to be, to make it clear to yourself. We're not talking about discussion or fighting or whatever. We're saying the writer has thought through what they're saying. And what's funny is we're going to see this used in many ways in the writing, especially in John. And at some places you may say, really? Is that a reason? Is that something you reason through? And what we'll do is we'll try to look at the word usage and what it's saying to understand why the writer may have used those words that way. That's what's important, right? When you read something, and we do this in English all the time, right? Well, maybe we don't do it enough. When you read something in English and you come across some odd word or some odd usage, what do? Yeah, you stop it. Well,
You Google it.
now you can. Now, on your the smart books, on the books, right, electronically, you can select the word and it'll look it up for you. I hope it gives you a good definition. Sometimes you'll worry about that a little bit, right? But yeah, that means that usually when you read something a little bit different, and as an author, when I write, if I write something oddly, I'm doing it on purpose because you want to draw if you're a good author. I mean, there are some authors out there who maybe, or people who write stuff and don't, aren't cogent to that. But it's really true. If you read something odd, it draws the attention of the reader. It's like painting. Tammy paints stuff. So you put something funny in your painting, what does that do? It draws your eyes to that point, right? And that's the thing. That's what writers do too. These writers especially had to, right? We're talking about Greek, very concrete Greek. At the same time, we're euphemistic, and we already said that John shows some interesting Romanized characteristics, and we may see more of that. Okay, so let's go down to this one. Okay, that's the problem with having these pretty deep complexities here. All right. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. So here we have, in Greek, okay, panta does not mean all things. It means all of the whole, but that's okay. Dia is pretty close to through. Here, let me show you the translation of this is the literal. Here's the Greek, or here's the King James. All things are made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. That's cool. Panta means of all or the whole, and of because it's a possessive. So it's a genitive, so it's a possessive word usage. So we always, in English, how do we indicate possession? There's two ways.
Austria.
Possess and we use of. Of shows possession. It's a preposition of possession in English. Other languages don't do that. They use, well, I can show you how they do it. I think it does it in this, okay, yeah. Panta, I think that's wrong. It's a nominative case. That's interesting. Why did I put maybe because I cut it and pasted it. Anyway, of it, I can do that right here. It's not genitive case, but that gives me a good explanation. If in English we would say of, or we would use possessive with apostrophe s or s apostrophe, it's plural. So all of the whole through dia, and by the way, in foreign languages, the preposition takes or produces or takes a case usually. Through auto of himself, this is a genitive case. I'll show you. Auto. That indicates that it's a genitive, and you can see down here it says that it's a genitive case. As I told you before, John uses very simple Greek. Egeneto means to cause to become. Kai and at a space, literally, choris means a chasm. Auto of himself, egeneto, to cause to become, not however, ode, one that, and ho can be that, and it has some, like, I think I put in others, which where, or it has some other use, but gegonen has come to be. So, a literal translation, a cultural translation of this, and see if we can go, yep. This is a literal translation. Panta, it can be considered everything. That's good. It means all the whole. Everything through him came to be, and apart from him, not one thing has come to be. So that's a good cultural and Greek, or a literal translation of what the Greek says. This is that concept of amar, as well as the action of, okay, I threw out the word the Son. It's the creative part of God, but the Amar in the creation of all things. And what's important to note, there's no difference between the aspects of God. Right? There's no difference between the Spirit, the Son, and God. We would say they interact in the world differently, but they're still the same God, right? So the question would be, philosophically or theologically, well, what is the difference? And we know the difference. This is what the writer is explaining to us. Christ is, he hasn't used the word yet, but the Amar is the logical argument that God, Tam would say the formula, right? God said this theorem, the theorem or formula, or all the chemistry and all the physics and everything is just God commanded. And that was the Christ part, the part of God that is the creation, the Amar. I think it's a beautiful point. And then I gave you the picture again. Let's see, here it shows the picture. I know the picture didn't come out as well as I'd like. I can't control this as well as, oh, there we go. So this is that picture of the Greek universe. And I've got good sources for this, but if you ever studied Greek, you probably know this already. The Greeks believe that the plenum of everything was, now we could call it space or whatever, but it's the infinite non-created, right? The infinite. Because you do know, right? The cosmos or the created is finite. Now, our even our let's make sure Sarah is cosmetologists.
No, that's the first one.
Cosmology.
There.
Those who paint your face. No, those who study physics of cosmology, right? And they even have the word, right? What do they say? Is the universe finite or infinite?
They say it's
Actually, they say it is finite because in the Big Bang, right? Now, that's the problem. That's the problem, okay? So before the Big Bang, right? And it's not like I'm just talking about science here, right? So don't get too excited about it. I'm just talking about science. So they say in the Big Bang that there is an infinite plenum of everything, right? But then when the Big Bang exploded, the creation of the Big Bang, is it finite or infinite?
I just
would be
read
fine.
that the Big Bang is as big as it has taken light to travel since it started.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, they're saying like, I think I've been a while since I've looked at it, but I think they say like 24 billion years, I think. The problem is that it takes 60 billion years to even have a 1 in a million chance of having life by, by random stuff. So the universe is still like 3 times younger than it needs to be to have life in it. Oh my goodness gracious! Oh, but anyway, but see, what the thing is that you have a plenum of everything. Well, I mean, even our science agrees with this. You have a plenum of everything that's infinite, and then you have the Big Bang that creates a finite creation, right? Because it's universes moving out, and light and time and energy moving outward from that point. So the creation or cosmos is finite, but the plenum of everything is infinite. Whoa! Holy smoke! This is like the Bible. Oh, anyway, within the cosmos, we have what man can understand, what human beings can understand, which is philosophia. We usually translate the love of wisdom or the love of knowledge, but it's not. It's really what human beings can understand. And then we have the gay. The gay is the physical universe. And we're going to get more into this because it's a very important idea, but the gay includes like the gay includes everything that we would say is matter, right? Matter. All the matter from the Big Bang is the gay. Yes, sir.
Including like laws of science.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all subsumed. Because, okay, I hope I blow your minds a little bit. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Where's the spiritual? Well, it's more than that because the philosophy is what man can understand,
Oh, I'm sorry.
right?
I misunderstood what you're asking.
Well, the spiritual, I mean, don't feel bad because the spiritual, right? God, we would say God is spiritual, right? God is part of that pneuma, that spirit, right? The ruach of God. But the ruach of God exists in a plenum of everything, throughout everything, right? And only in the creation did God become 3 persons because he's a 4-dimensional God projected into 3 dimensions. Pretty cool, right? But then the cosmos includes everything that God created. And we know there's, angel things, right? There's angel things, and there's devil things.
you said the devil was in charge of the gay.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Bible says. I don't think we get much into that in John, but in Luke, we already went through Luke, right? And it said that now the devil lies all the time, but
He did tell Jesus, God gave me, I'm in charge of this.
yeah,
He
and
tempted him with the-
Jesus didn't disagree. So yeah, the devil, Satan, according to the Bible, according to most of the New Testament documents and some of the Old Testament, is in charge of the gay, has been given authority over the gay. However, we know in the gay, God has provided, okay, see, The Greeks would say our modern philosophers and scientists are idiots because they totally ignore all those things like mathematics that are outside of the gay. The mathematics is logical and not in symbolic. It has nothing to do with the gay, right? Even though it's formula, but the formulas that we write down are only symbols. The things we do in the church are what? We do symbols of the spiritual to reflect the spiritual. If I'm a mathematician or a cosmologist, right, I write a theorem down using symbols of mathematics. You think I would be a spiritual genius, right? Because I'm using spiritual stuff all the time. What's the difference between a shaman, right, drawing symbols of the world on the ground in paint, and a scientist using mathematics to symbolically define the universe? It's like this. It's like not a huge difference. We would say the scientist uses observation. Well, the shaman would say I'm using observation too, right? I'm not trying to equate shamans and scientists. I'm just saying that they're using similar kinds of verbiage and similar kinds of ideas to define what they understand, right? We do the same thing in English. We use symbolic language all the time. We find the Greeks don't. The Greeks aren't using symbolic language. They're using concrete language. They're trying to articulate it in a philosophical term. And, you know, our Latin brothers, and of course our translators translating into English, what do? Oh my goodness gracious. I've got to make it cogent to the American mind, right? So there are 10 types of love in Greek, right? There's 10 specific words. None of them are close to English love, but I use love for every one of them. And we're going to see that usage too. That's really fun. Anyway, I need to mention this, and I've decided to put it into the context, but this third verse is an apocryphal allusion to Wisdom 9:1. And it is this: O God of my ancestors and Lord, and okay, I need to explain this before we go on. I'll have to explain this again. Rabbinic context. Rabbinic context means when any author or any speaker in the ancient world does a allusion or a quote, what does it mean? You have to look at everything around it, because remember, you know, we in English are used to pulling stuff out of context. We do it all the time, right? You know, Jesus wept, so that's all he did. He was weeping all the time. No, Jesus didn't weep all the time. Jesus wept is a statement in the Greek that we take out of context all the time. We take all kinds of stuff that Jesus said out of context. Guess what? We do it in English all the time. We love pithy little sayings, right? That's why I always say history is not a bumper sticker. Well, we really like bumper stickers, right? So we want some bumper sticker stuff. But every time, if I mention an allusion, Tammy was just looking at Lama Lama Eli Sabachthani, right?
Psalm 22.
That comes from Psalm 22. It's a quote. And Jesus said it on the cross. He said in Aramaic. I need to check the Aramaic versus the Torah, but I think they're really close because the Aramaic comes directly from Hebrew. But, you
This
know,
writer was saying that because Christ said that phrase, he probably was reciting the entire psalm.
well, it's not probably.
Well, because, yeah, and that's why they didn't write it all out in the gospel, but Christ was probably reciting that psalm before he died.
Well,
It's really fascinating.
whether he said the whole words or not is meaningless, right? The point in rabbinic context is the minute you see a quote or an allusion, what you have to do? Go back to the context, because remember, everybody has memorized. Okay, the educated readers have memorized the whole Septuagint in Greek, right? And all the Hebrews have memorized at least the Torah, right? And those who are educated rabbis, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the rabbis have all memorized the Tanakh and the Mishnah. So anytime I make an allusion or a quote, I mean the whole thing. So I'll try to give it, it takes time to go through this, but that's okay. You can read it too. O God of my ancestors and Lord of mercy, who have made all things by your word, and that's lego, by your logical argument in the Greek. This is Greek because it comes from wisdom. Wisdom is a Greek document. And by your wisdom, it's apocryphal. And by your wisdom have formed humankind to have dominion over the creatures you've made and rule the world in holiness and righteousness and pronounce judgment of uprightness of soul. Give me the wisdom that sits by your throne. Do not reject me from among your servants. For I am your servant, the son of your serving girl, a man who is weak and short-lived, with little understanding of judgment and laws. For even one who is perfect among human beings is regarded as nothing without the wisdom that comes from you. You have chosen me to be the king of your people, to be a judge over your sons and daughters. You have given command to build a temple on your holy mountain and an altar in the city of habitation. A copy of the holy tent that you prepared from the beginning. With you is wisdom. She knows the works. This was written before, about 200 years at least before the New Testament. 250 years. This is wisdom and apocryphal doctrine. What does this sound like? Sure sounds like Isaiah, right? Right? This I'm telling you, the reason we know about, and I won't read the whole thing, but this goes on and on. It's beautiful. It's beautiful in the way that it writes it. And if we look at it in the Greek, we'd have to tear it in the Greek. Look at this. We can hardly guess at what is on Gay, on the earth, and what is at hand we find with labor. But who has traced out what is in the heavens? And I don't know if that's Epiuranos or Uranus. Who has learned your counsel unless you've given wisdom, etc. This is a pining to wisdom, to knowledge. So the philosophia, right? Knowing what man can know. But it's beautiful. And it also talks about that servant, the what we call the suffering servant, right? And remember, the Apocrypha, remember Jesus, I can never forget this quote. I need to bring that quote out myself and throw it in here because Jesus said, you have a Messiah in every generation. And the reason he could say that is because in the Apocryphal period, remember the Maccabees declared their kings to be the priest, which is the ingredient. Remember when we talked about rabbinic Messiah? That's the ingredient for the rabbinic Messiah according to the Jews, is he is the king and the priest. Later on, Rambam separated that out into two people, which is kind of funny. But anyway, so in every generation from the Maccabees, they had a Messiah. The problem is, they kept dying and not being resurrected. That's the thing, is we see the evidence in the Apocrypha and also in the Old Testament that this Messiah is God. And that's what John, okay, I know, in my notes that I got from the thing, it talks about this is the, prayer to the Word, right? It isn't the prayer to the Word. This is a philosophical and theological proof text that this person that John is writing about, this being, is God. And not only is God, but is the Amar, the command word of God. So let's look at the next one, because this really gets into stuff. It's like the author's playing at mystery, right? If you didn't know this, if you didn't know that he's talking about Jesus, you'd be like, well, this is neat, right? Neat story. But the author is always also setting up. Remember we have, and if I have my board, I write it. Remember we have when we do a logical argument, we have definitions, assumptions, we have the proof, and then we have the conclusions of the proof. That's what this author is doing. His definitions are the Amar and the command word, right? He's taking right from the Torah, and he calls it the logical argument. And then he says, this logical argument is the same as God. Not separate, it is God. And now, then he said, everything that was created, everything that was made because of this logical argument, because of this thing, this being. And then he says this is NIV, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Let's see, I want to get back up to that. Let's see, bring me up. Okay, here's what the King James says. In him was life, and life was in the light of men. Now here we go. In him, life, he was. There's one of our identity verbs, right? And should we see this much in Greek? Nope, but we've already had it twice. Kai and the life, it was the source of light, phos, source of light, the anthropon of man face, of human or men. So here's a translation, a cultural translation. In his life, he was the source of light. And his life was the source of light to humans. Now, what is this about light? This is a really important kind of transition the author has done. What he's done is, in the Torah, and I probably should have re-quoted the Torah, but you guys remember, right? In the beginning was Elohim, and the Ruach of Elohim was across the waters, and Elohim Amar. And what was the first thing created? Light. 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 Light is not equated with life.
In Torah?
In the Torah. No, what is equated with life in the Torah? I can put it right up here.
Is it the breath?
Yeah, the nefesh. Because God created or breathed life into the animals and into man with nefesh, not life. Now suddenly, the author brings up light. Now, we as scientists and modern era people should immediately know what's going on. I'm going to give you some pictures of this. But now remember, he hasn't said who this is yet, right? He hasn't said, we know it's Yamar, so this is the mystery that we're being built into. But light, okay, the first time a Greek is going to say phos, or source of light, every speaker, hearer, knowledgeable person is going to say, every Greek person is going to say, that is a mysterion idea. That's a mysterion. Because remember, in the mysterion, one of the big things in the Mithrin mysterion and of all the mysterions is ceremonies of light. It's huge. Light is a symbol for them of life, and light is the symbol that they use. And why? I don't know why. I suspect it's because we finally have a society. Remember, you move into Mysterion when you start figuring out about philosophy, right? Philosophy and theology. Philosophy and theology, same thing. You basically begin to go into Mysterion when you begin to think about philosophy. But I suspect the other thing that you get with it is, what do you think? Why do you think light is suddenly a big idea in this period, in this time? How about the cost of light has come down to a point where the average person can experience it to a degree, right? I mean, look what Jesus said all the time, right? The women, the oil for the lamps, the bride, the bridesmaids, right? That presumes that what? You can afford to buy gasoline. No, you can afford to buy the oil, right? You can afford to buy the oil for your lamps. Now, they didn't have candles, like what we consider candles, but this means that there was oil available for people to use in, festival events, or what would the rabbis be using light for? Maybe. Reading, right? Reading materials, because finally, the daylight is moving, right? It's like, you ever seen the pictures at night of North Korea? There's no light. And you look at South Korea, and there's lights everywhere. We've won against the darkness in the sense that we have developed light. And Mysterion used as a symbol the light. And so they have light ceremonies. It's huge. And almost every Mysterion, we know the Mithrin Mysterion met in caves. And so, remember Jesus said, don't hide your light under a bushel? He's talking about Mysterion practice. The Mysterion would go into their places with a bushel basket covering their lights. And in the ceremony of lights, we know they would pull their bushel baskets all away, which would then illuminate the cavern, or the place they were, and it would be, it's beautiful. We do the same thing, right?
With our phones.
And our phones. It's called symbols. It's symbolic, right, of what we're trying to express. Now, remember, go ahead, you have a question.
I was just saying, today they do the same thing. When someone has an idea, they always show the light bulb going on in their head.
Well, you know why they say that? Remember, phos is the basis for phemi. Phemi means opinion, but in the Greeks, an opinion wasn't something necessarily you reason. It was something that suddenly came into your mind, right? And it's your idea or opinion. But phos is that idea in the Greek that suddenly I have an idea. It may be a bad idea or a good idea, but I got one, right? An opinion. So the idea of phos is that whole idea of having a new idea. So a light bulb is a perfect definition. That's what we are right now, right? The mysterium. He brings up this light, equating it life, and okay, I put in Christ, but we already know what the punchline is, right? So it's okay. In a biological sense, this is scientifically accurate, right? Can you have light without life? Or life without light? You know, from a biological sense? No, if the sun wasn't here, we'd be dead. We'd be cold and whatever. Spiritual sense, this is true too, right? Life is a spiritual revelation. It's a basis. We're going to see later it'll be equated with spirit or pneuma, as well as the Amar. But right now, the author is talking about the Amar and the creation word, etc. Light, from a scientific standpoint, okay, I know, don't let your eyes glaze over, but that's okay. Light means a wave that consists of discrete packets of energy called photons, or quanta. The frequency of the wave is proportional, etc., etc. I put this in there. It's this is all about light stuff. This is the stuff we learn in science, so it's cool. But here I want to show you a picture. This is my picture. I've already started writing and getting all my references, so this is really a fun picture. This is light. So here we start with the radio waves. Here's wavelength, the radio waves, right? These are packets or photons.
M or FM.
Yeah. Here's your FM, yeah. Here's your FM, here's microwaves, that's what you cook your dinner with. Here's the infrared, here's the visible light. So the only thing you can see in visible light is like a tiny part of the spectrum. Ultraviolet, infrared, then we get into the really high. These become, here's wavelength equals the size of atomic nuclei. Now why is that important? Why is it a big deal getting the gamma rays? What's the big deal about when the wavelength starts to become the size of an atomic nuclei? Anybody know enough about science to know why that's a big deal? Well, it is radiation. It can hurt you, yeah, gamma. But what's the big deal about when photons start getting that big or getting that close to wavelength? It's in the verbiage. Let me see if I can get the verbiage up here. When a photon is absorbed by an atom, it excites an electron, elevating it to a higher energy level. This is when we get up to gamma ray area. If the energy is great enough so the electron jumps to a high enough, it may escape the positive pole of the nucleus and be liberated from the atom in a process called ionization. Conversely, an electron that descends to a low energy level emits a photon of light. Wait. How can an electron emit a photon of light unless it has photons in it, right? So guess what we know that, and I should write it in here, but guess what we know is in every neutron, proton, and electron? Photons and smaller subparticles that they have named, and I probably ought to put a picture of that in, but subatomic particles smaller than electrons and neutrons and protons, there are particles that are photon-like particles that have wavelength and create energy. Okay, I'm going to go through, I actually need to write this down in here, but remember, if I made a electron, if I made a proton the size of a golf ball, an electron the size of a pin, the average distance for a hydrogen atom the electron would be 5 miles away from the golf ball. 5 miles. Now that's average, because according to Heisenberg principle, it can be anywhere in the universe, but the average is about 5 miles. So if a proton is that big, the electron is like smaller than my fingertip, 5 miles. So that means if I got rid of all of the space in, let's say, the solar system, all the matter in the solar system would fit in a,
5-gallon bucket.
well, actually a number 5 pail.
Okay.
But that's close enough. Number 5 pail, I think, is about this big. I'm not a farmer, but I think a number 5 pail. You know, pails are rated by size, and I don't know if they're bigger or smaller, like nails or wires. But anyway, a number 5 pail, I think, is about that big. So all of the matter in the universe, all the electrons, protons, neutrons would fit in a pail that big. Now it'd be really heavy,
Very dense, yes.
very dense, yes. But that's what would happen. Now, remember, all those particles happen to be energy, packets of photons, packets of energy, which means that when light was created, what was created?
Matter.
Energy and matter. In other words, first came energy, right? The photons, the wavelength, all that stuff, and then what happened?
EMC squared.
EMC squared. Yeah, all those photons began to. Somebody did it. Okay, you know, strong force, weak force. Strong force is what holds the electron together. Because why does electrons even hang around photons? Since one is positive, one is negative. And by the way, neutrons in the middle, right? They're negative charge. Or their charge is neutral. How do they stick together? Why do the protons stick together in a nucleus? Because they're repulsive, right? The positives repulse each other. So how they stay? That's called the strong force. We don't know what causes the strong force. Guess what? Somebody had to do it. The Amar. The Amar created light. And guess what? Because the Amar created light, we have matter. And that's the point. Light presupposes energy. The energy electron, neutron, or proton can be converted to energy as photons. In other words, the logical argument created the basic elements of the universe, and that basic element was light. Light or energy encapsulated photons and waves led directly to the creation of matter. This is absolutely the way the world is. Let's see. Oh, wait. I guess we do this. NIV, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome it. Now, this is a beautiful statement. Let's see what the Greek says. Because, you know, here's the literal Greek. And the phos, the source of light, in the scotia, the darkness, Thanai, being lighted. That's the basis for opinion, Thanai. Being lightened, shine, and the scotia, the darkness, know or not, to take eagerly. So let's see what a good translation of that is. And the source of light in the darkness illuminates it, but the darkness does not accept it eagerly. Now I think this is really interesting because this is a very powerful theological idea. God didn't have to create darkness. It was already here. Yeah, isn't that interesting? But God created,
He separated them.
well, that's the word used in Torah. But the reality is, you know, this is,
So would you say the plenum of everything is dark, and then
And cold.
creation made the light?
you know, see this, now we're getting to really, this is your brain, make your brain work this way because this is getting to very strong theological stuff. I would argue the plenum of everything is a plenum of God. So God is in everything, and there's no darkness in God, right? God is it all. But when God created, right, the Amar, when he used the Amar, that we know will be Christ, right, to create the universe, then what he did is he created a light. Now we know that within, and this is interesting because the Big Bang, right, it went out into this, the infinite, we'd say space. But space is not space. Space originally is filled with what? Energy, right? It's all energy. Even in the darkness. When can you get total darkness? It's a trick question.
Can I turn off the light switch?
No! You can't get perfect darkness because it has to be 0 Kelvin, right? 0 Kelvin. But what do we know about the universe? Is the universe at 0 Kelvin? I know this is a really deep scientific question. Is the universe at 0 Kelvin? It would be very bad if it is. It isn't. It's at like positive 4 Kelvin. And the reason is because even the spaces are not spaces. This is not, do you remember before the modern theories of ideas, what did they think the universe was filled with? Remember? Ether. Yes, very good. Ether. It was filled with ether. A-E-T-H-E-R, I think. But the ether filled everything. But we know it's not ether that fills everything. It's energy that fills everything. There is energy. There are light waves. Whatever you want to think, those light waves from all the stars that you can see, what are they doing? They're promulgating through that space. The space isn't empty. It's filled with light waves, right? All of it. There is no space that is not filled with light waves, with energy in the universe.
But you can go back to the diagram. It's the full spectrum. It's not just invisible light. It's
Yes.
travel.
Right. Everything, right? That's why the universe's temperature is like 4 Kelvin. Because everywhere there is energy. So in other words, see, this is a beautiful theological question. Is there any darkness? Not really. Right? But the writer says, and the source of light in the darkness illuminates it. Now we're talking here, when we say illuminate, we mean, visible light, right? So this is, okay. In this era, did they even know about non-visible light? No idea, okay? Infrared, you can't see it, but it sure makes you nice and warm. UV gives you skin cancer, okay, tans your skin. So, they had no idea that radiation, light, anything different than light, because it's all they can see and perceive and measure. So, in the gay, yeah, there is, right, but we're talking totally cultural. It illuminates the dark, but the darkness does not accept it eagerly. Now we get the really huge theological.
Didn't they, back then, thinking back to people like that, they had the sun and they had the moon, right? And so, would they think the source of light, their sun, is the source of light?
No.
Okay.
They would not have concluded. We automatically conclude quite correctly that the sun is the source of our light.
But they didn't understand that.
They would not have conceived of that. They would see the sun out there as a thing, right? And yes, it's obvious that the sun produces shadows and produces, some light or whatever. But their conclusion of why does the sun, what is making the sun produce light and the sun and the earth be lighted?
Spirit or a God?
Spirit of God, yeah. So if I'm an animist, I would say that the spirits, are, the spirits wake up in the morning and they go to work, right? And if I'm a pantheonic pagan, I say, well, that's old Apollo. Apollo's getting on his, giddy up, I'm on my chariot and the horses that are the flaming horses. I'm going across the sky, and I'm playing my lyre at the same time. Remember? Right? He has a 10-gallon hat, too. So, Apollo was the god, and what would they say? It's not the sun. They would not say, the sun is too small, right? Look at the sun. Can you imagine the sun could illuminate and heat the earth? No. It's the spirits here, right? Spirits and the gods, right? It's just the sun is this visible thing, right? And that's Apollo. And his horses, right? There's no connection. They have no connection. Now, maybe somebody, as we move into Mysterion in science, someone may get that idea, right? That maybe the sun heats the whole earth, but that's a new idea, right? So, you know, this very, I have to select it. I get it.
Can you touch the screen?
Should come back. I need to set the settings. I only have a few minutes anyway. But, okay. Now, you know, he still hasn't brought up this thing about Jesus or Christ or anything. But what he's done in 6 is, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. Let's look at it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. That's what King James, so pretty close. This is what it says in the Greek. God caused to become a man having been set apart, named John. This is a Greek. He caused to become a man-faced human or man, and it's a singular, so it's a man. Apostolinos, having been set apart. Remember apostle? Apostle means to basically set apart, and this is a verb meaning that from of God. From, this is a genitive case, so possessive case. A name to him, John. Name John. So literally, this is what it says. God caused a man having been set apart, named John. A little bit different than, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. I think this is really interesting. Part of the thing is,
How can you say apostle of God, named John?
I would argue that this time, you know, when I say an apostle, it means to set apart. And what I want you to see in this statement is, yeah, it's a little bit off from the translation we have in our translators, but you can see why they wrote what they did, right? You can see it. I understand it. But do you see that this totally encapsulates what we see in Matthew and Luke? Right? We have a whole thing about John, right? And what does it say in Matthew and Luke? Basically that John was this guy who was set apart, right?
The Holy Spirit when he was in the womb. I mean, that
Yeah. This right here tells us part of that story, right? The thing I'm going to describe next week, we'll get into, is about John, who he is, right? You can see my little notes down here. This is about John the Immerser. We're going to find out John the Immerser. We call him John the Baptist, but it's John the Immerser in Greek. But we're going to see some stuff about him, right? I'm going to talk about his background. But this just tells us, there was a man sent from God. His name was John. This, on the other hand, tells us a story in one statement. Now, it's not as great and broad a story as we get in Matthew and Luke, right? With Matthew and Luke, we get some pretty detailed stuff about, you know, the name of his mother, and how he was conceived, and Mary coming to visit, and his father, you know, basically was a priest and all this other stuff. But you know what? The readers already knew that. Why? They already had Matthew and Luke. John is not telling them anything new. What he wants to do is tell them new stuff, right? Because that's what they asked for. I think when John got to writing this thing, probably around 70 to 90 AD or so, the other Gospels were out. And what did people say? Tell me more. Tell me more. And so we got John the Apostle, and John the Immerser, right? Because this isn't he is an apostle, but he's John the Immerser, not John the Apostle we call. Anyway, we ran out of time. When we get into this, we're going to look at who John was, because that's who's been brought up to us. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray.
If it were written in modern times, they'd put a footnote on there and say, see Matthew